I'm Gargi. I live in the late Vedic period. I'm well versed in the Vedas and philosophy. In this video, we'll cover ancient Indian history from 1300 BCE to 600 BCE. Music, we've started a series on ancient Indian history. This is the second video in that series. After watching this video, you won't have any wrong answers about the history from 1300 BCE to 600 BCE. On this channel, music, ancient Indian history will be presented like a movie, so make sure to subscribe to this channel. Let's get started. Thousands of years ago, when civilizations were buried under massive stones, when the sages' voices echoed in the Vedas, and when iron began to change the course of human history, that's when ancient Indian history was being born. So get ready to take a journey through India's ancient past. This was the time when humans cleared forests and split rocks to pave the way for progress for generations to come. In this video, we'll cover topics like the Iron Age culture and the Megalithic culture. So we're talking about the Megalithic culture, the early Vedic period, and then the later Vedic period. Let's start with the Iron Age culture. The discovery of iron was probably the biggest turning point in human history because using iron was way more convenient than using other metals. The Iron Age in India began roughly between 1500 BCE and 1200 BCE. In India, the Iron Age started in two different ways. In North India, people used iron to make farming tools, weapons, and other useful stuff. In North India, iron was used extensively. Forests were cleared, farming started, and Vedic culture developed. Meanwhile, in South India, the use of iron appeared as part of the megalithic culture, also known as the Late Stone Age culture. People in South India made iron weapons, but their biggest claim to fame was their burial customs. When someone died, they used to bury iron objects along with the dead body. For protection, they'd also place huge stones called megaliths around the grave. That's why this culture is known as the megalithic culture. Sites of this megalithic culture have been found in Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, the Vidarbha region, Andhra Pradesh, and Telangana. Let me clarify that in South India, after the Copper Age, the Iron Age came directly. Unlike North India, there was no Bronze Age in between. This means the Bronze Age culture belonged to North India, while the megalithic culture was related to South India. Remains of the Iron Age culture have been found in a place called Adiranjakheda in the Etah district of Uttar Pradesh. From here, iron slag dating back to around 1000 BCE has been discovered. Furnaces have been found that prove iron was being smelted locally here 3,000 years ago. Besides that, an iron spade and sickle were discovered in the village of Jakhara in Uttar Pradesh. Music. Between 1500 BCE and 1000 BCE, the Aryans arrived in India. Music. There's no unanimous agreement among historians about whether the Aryans were native Indians or foreign invaders. Some historians believe the Aryans were Indian, while others see them as foreign attackers. I'll leave that judgment to you, the viewers. Now, let's see what happened in India after the arrival of the Aryans. Things changed. Music. At that time, there wasn't any big empire, but large farming communities had sprung up in places like North India, the Deccan Plateau, and Karnataka. In the Deccan and South India, shepherd settlements were established. I'm a farmer living on the Deccan Plateau. We also have large settlements in North India and Karnataka. Historians don't know much about us. We mainly focus on farming and animal husbandry. These very settlements later grew into big empires. Around this time, the first states, empires, and kingdoms started to develop. Gradually, we began to organize ourselves politically. These political changes led to new ways of farming and managing crops. This was also when the Rigvedic period, or early Vedic era, began in India. It was during this time that the world's oldest text, the Rigveda, was composed orally. The Aryans were the first to settle in the Sapta Sindhu region in India. So, what exactly is this Sapta Sindhu area? Let's find out. Let's discuss this in depth. The Rigveda's river hymn mentions 21 rivers, but among these river regions, there was a specific area called the Sapta Sindhu region. This was the land of 7 rivers. So, which were these 7 rivers? The first was the Sindhu River, which is mentioned the most times in the Rigveda. The second was the Saraswati, considered the holiest and best river in the Rigveda. Third was the Videsta, which is the Jhelum River. Fourth was the Asikni, meaning the Chenab River. The fifth was the Parushni, which is the Ravi River. and the sixth was the Vipasha, known today as the Beas River. The seventh river was called Shuddadri, which is the Satluj River. The early Aryans lived around here. If we look at it in today's terms, this area includes present-day Punjab, Haryana, and parts of Afghanistan. Let's dive deeper into the Rigveda. The Rigveda is considered the oldest text in the world, and it's also believed to be a Purusharya, meaning it wasn't written by humans but by the gods. The Rigveda is also called Shruti, which means it wasn't written down, but passed on by hearing and memorizing. It has a total of 10 books, 1,028 hymns, and 10,580 verses or mantras. Books 2 to 7 are the oldest. They're called the family books or sage books. Books 1 and 10 were added later. Now, let me tell you about the important books that are often asked about in exams. The most important is the third book. In this third book, the sage Vishwamitra composed the Gayatri Mantra. I am sage Vishwamitra. I composed the Gayatri Mantra. Om Bhur Bhuvasva. Tat Savatar Varnyam. Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi. Dihyo Yona Prachadayat. This is the same mantra you've always said in school prayers. The Gayatri Mantra is dedicated to Savita, the sun god. Yep, that's right. Now let's talk about the 7th chapter. It talks about the famous battle of the 10 kings. This battle happened on the banks of the Parushni, which is the Ravi River, between Sudas and an alliance of 10 other kings. The reason for the battle was that King Sudas replaced his main priest Vishwamitra with Vashistha. Angered by this, Vishwamitra formed an alliance of 10 kings, but Sudas came out victorious. Music. This King Sudas was the king of the Bharat tribe. Yes, the same Bharat after whom our country, India, is named. The 9th mandala is also an important one. It is completely dedicated to Soma, the god of plants. Now, let's come to the most controversial mandala, the 10th mandala. In the 10th mandala, there's a hymn by a man. This hymn explains the fourfold system in detail. According to this system, everyone in society is divided into 4 groups based on their work. The first group is the Brahmins, who originated from the mouth of Brahma. It's said that the Kshatriyas come second, originating from Brahma's arms. Third are the Vaisyas, said to have come from Brahma's stomach. And last, at the bottom, are the Sudras, who are said to have come from Brahma's feet. During the Rigvedic period, this system was entirely based on one's actions. That means people from different Varnas could be part of the same family. This was where the Varna system in India began, and by the later Vedic period, it had turned into the caste system, meaning the caste system in the later Vedic period was based on actions. Back then, your status wasn't decided by your birth. Now, let's see what the political system was like during the Rigvedic period. Politics in the Rigvedic era was completely tribal and democratic. There was no standing army or bureaucracy. I'm from the Rigvedic era, so let me tell you how the political system worked back then. The smallest unit was the family, headed by the head of the household, called the Kulpa or Grihapati. Larger than the family was the village, which was a group of several families. Its head was called the Gramini. Bigger than the village was the Visha, which was a group of villages. The chief was called Vishpati. The largest tribal unit was the tribe itself. People called their chief Rajan, Gop, or Gopi. The word Jan is mentioned 275 times in the Rigveda. Now, let's talk about the democratic institutions during the Rigvedic era. The first was the Sabha. The Sabha was an assembly of the tribe's elders and elites, functioning much like today's Rajya Sabha. The second was the Samiti. This was the central assembly of common people that elected the king, very much like today's Lok Sabha. Its president was called Ishan. The third was Vidath. It is the oldest. It was an organization that handled the distribution of loot and also held religious discussions. Now, let's understand the status of women during the Rig Vedic period. I am Lopa Madra, I am Gosha, I am Apala, and I am Sikta. We are all highly educated and wise women. The Rig Vedic period was like a golden age for women. Women had a very good status during this time. Girls had the right to the Upanayana ceremony and education. They could participate in assemblies and political institutions like the Vidha, child marriage. There was no Purdah system back then. In that era, there were learned women like Lopamadra, Gosha, Apala, and Sikta, basically scholar women. I am Lopamudra, the wife of sage Agastya. During the Rigvedic period, women not only sat alongside their husbands during religious rituals, but the yajna sacrifice was considered incomplete without them. Girls got married in their youth, around 16 or 17 years old, with their own consent. Yes, women had a good status during the Rigvedic period. There's no evidence of child marriage, sati practice, purdah system, or female feticide in society at that time. Music people in the Rigvedic era valued cows a lot. How? Let me tell you. I'm from the Rigvedic period. Let me explain how we lived back then. Animal husbandry was our main occupation because we Aryans were mostly herders. Farming was our secondary job. In the fourth book of the Rigveda, farming is mentioned only 24 times. Cows were very important to us. We considered cows sacred and never to be killed. If anyone accidentally killed a cow, they were either given the death penalty or exiled. Among us, there were even wars between cows. The battles fought over cows were called Gavishti music, and the search for cows was called Gavshana. We measured time by something called Godhulai and distances by Gavuti. Some non-Aryan people from the Pan caste used to steal our cows. Music now, let's see what the lifestyle and food habits of people during the Rig Vedic period were like. People back then were both vegetarians and meat-eaters. Their main food was Keshur Pakodanam, which is like kheer, made from milk and ghee. Soma juice was a sacred drink made from herbs found on the Manjavant mountain, while Sura referred to alcohol. They were criticized in society. They had 3 types of clothes. The cloth worn below the waist was called Nivai. The main garment worn above the waist was called Vas. The cloth draped over the shoulders, like a shawl or dupatta, was called Idhivas. Now, let's talk about the Rigvedic religion. The Aryans worshipped natural forces. They were polytheists, meaning they worshipped many gods. But in the end, they believed in one ultimate god, that is, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahadha Vadanti. The truth is one, but sages call it by many names. These were the gods they worshipped. They can be divided into 3 groups. One group included gods of space like Indra, Marut, and Rudra. The second group consisted of sky gods like the sun, Varuna, Mitra, and Vishnu. The third main group were earth gods like Agni, Soma, and Prithvi. Indra was the greatest god, and there are 250 hymns dedicated to him. He is called Purandar, meaning the breaker of forts, and is also the god of rain. Agni was the second most important god, with 200 hymns written for him. Agni was seen as the messenger between humans and gods, the third major god. This is Varuna. He's called the guardian of RTA, which means cosmic or moral order. Now, let's take a look at the rules about marriage during the Rigvedic period. I am a woman living in the Rigvedic era. In our society, normally, the tradition was to have one wife. Some important people like kings and ministers had more than one marriage, but regular folks considered having just one wife as proper. Now, I'll explain how our society understood and accepted Anuloma and Pratuloma marriages. They used to do this. When a Brahmin or Kshatriya man married a woman of a lower caste, it was called an Anulam marriage. This type of Anulam marriage was accepted in society. People considered it normal and acceptable. But if a woman from a higher caste married a man from a lower caste, society frowned upon it and deemed it unacceptable. Yes, now that you know the marriage rules, let me tell you that if a girl doesn't want to get married and chooses to remain unmarried her whole life, staying at her father's home and studying the Vedas and Vedangas, then this. Girls of a certain kind were called Amaju. They had the right to support from the ancestral property. Now, let me tell you some important things about the Rig Vedic period. First, let's talk about the military system. Back then, the tribe's king didn't have a permanent standing army. During war, the tribe's youth would come together to form the army. Next, let's discuss the tax system. In the Rig Vedic period, the king didn't collect any taxes. Instead, the people would voluntarily give gifts to the king, which were called bali. When it comes to family, the households back then were patriarchal, meaning the father was the head of the family. But still, women held a pretty strong position. As for metal use, the Rigvedic people used copper and bronze, which they called ores. Even though iron had been discovered elsewhere in the world, the people of this period didn't know about iron. Now, to sum up the Rigvedic era, no iron, so they didn't use iron, and no army either. There wasn't a standing army. During wartime, the young men of the tribe would just come together to form the army. There was no caste by birth, so the caste system was based on what you did, not where you were born. Music, no coins were used for trade. Instead, people exchanged goods directly. Music, there were no direct taxes. However, the people would voluntarily give gifts to the king, called Bali. Now I'm gonna take you to a time when a lot had changed since the Rig Vedic period. This era is known as the later Vedic period, so get ready. Let's take a trip back to the late Vedic period. If you're enjoying this video, make sure to like and share it. We learn about the late Vedic period from texts like the Samaveda, Yajurveda, Atharvaveda, as well as the Shatapatha and Aidarya Brahmana scriptures. Also, the Aranyakas and Upanishads are important literary sources to understand this era. One of the biggest changes during the late Vedic period was that the Aryans became familiar with using iron. The discovery of iron around 1000 BCE brought a revolution in this music era. Iron was. These people used to call it Krishna Ayask. Axes made of iron were used to cut down thick forests. At the same time, iron plows made it easier to till tough land. The Rigveda mentions the Aryans' residents as the Sapta Sindhu region of Punjab and Haryana, as well as the Kubha Kabul in Afghanistan, Kurumu, Kuram, Gamati, Gomal, and Suv a S letter 1E6DU, Swat, rivers. But during the later Vedic period, their settlements were not limited to the Sapta Sindhu region alone. The Shatapatha Brahmana talks about Vaidha Madhava. The story shows how the Aryans cleared the forests by setting fires and expanded towards the east. The Kuru Panchal region, that is, the Ganga Yamuna Doab area, had now become their new territory. In this video, we saw that during the Rigvedic period, the Aryans were mostly shepherds. Animal husbandry was their main occupation. But after the discovery of iron and clearing of forests, agriculture became their primary livelihood in the later Vedic period. They grew different kinds of crops. Now barley, yav, rice virai, and wheat godham became their main crops, with the development of agriculture. Staying in one place had become a necessity for them, so they gave up their nomadic lifestyle. They settled down permanently in one spot. In other words, their tribal way of life ended because of agriculture. Small villages started to form. Along with this, small regional states began to emerge. The people from the Puru and Burit tribes came together to form their own territory called the Kuru Kingdom, which was known as the Central Region. Similarly, the Turvash and Krivi tribes joined forces to create a new territory called Panchal. People stopped being loyal to just their tribe and started being loyal to their region or kingdom instead. With the development of small kingdoms, the king's power started to grow. The position of king became hereditary, passed down through families. Kings began holding grand rituals like Rajasuya, Ashvamedha, and Vajipya to showcase their power and empires. As the king's power increased, democratic institutions from the Rigvedic period like the Sabha and Samiti weakened and came under the control of the king and the upper class. These institutions were no longer democratic. Now, let me introduce you to an administrative officer from the later Vedic period. He will tell you about the later Vedic era. I'll tell you about the administrative system. I'm an administrative officer from the later Vedic period. In our time, the high-ranking officials were called Ratnis. They were equivalent to today's IAS and IPS officers. The Shatapatha Brahmana mentions 12 Ratnis, but here I'll focus on the 8 most important ones. The first Ratni was the Purohit, the king's chief advisor or religious guru. The second was the Senani, the commander of the army. The third was the Suda, the king's charioteer and historian. The fourth was the Bagtu. The main officer in charge of collecting taxes. This is the most important for the exam. The fifth was Ratni. The collector was like a treasurer. The sixth was Akshavap. He was the king's companion in the dice game. And seventh, he kept track of the income and expenses. The seventh was Palgal. He was the king's friend or messenger. The eighth was the Maharshi, not an officer. He was the king's chief queen and also advised the king. Looks like you guys got confused. Okay, I'll tell you a shortcut to remember all this. Purohit, Senani, Ni Sut Ka Bag. The collection was given to Mahesh, who is a bit crazy about scriptures. Hopefully, you now have a good understanding of the administrative system during the later Vedic period. Now, let's look at the different types of marriages in that era. The first was Brahma marriage, considered the best. In this, the daughter was given to a worthy and learned groom without any expectation of dowry. The second was Deva marriage, where the daughter was given to the priest performing the yajna. The third type was Arsha marriage, where the groom's side gave a symbolic gift like a cow or bull to the bride's family and took the bride in return. So this type of marriage was called Arsha marriage. The fourth type was Prajapatiya marriage. In this, the bride's father would counsel the groom about fulfilling household duties and then get the marriage done. The fifth was Gandharva marriage, which we can call love marriage. When the boy and girl married each other out of their own will and love, it was called Gandharva marriage. The sixth was Asura marriage. In this type, the groom's side would pay money to the girl's family to basically buy her. This kind of marriage was not considered good in society. The seventh type of marriage was Rakshasa marriage. This was also considered a low-class kind of marriage. This involved forcibly abducting a girl and marrying her. In other words, without the girl's consent, she was kidnapped and forcibly married. During wars, when soldiers would take women or girls with them, these kinds of marriages happened. The eighth and final type of marriage was called Paishach marriage. It was basically a form of sexual assault. Among the different types of marriages, Paishach was considered the worst. It involved exploiting a woman through deceit, trickery, or taking advantage of a woman who was unconscious, due to madness, intoxication, or sleep. Marriage was a big deal back then. Among the different types, Brahma, Deva, Arsha, and Prajapatiya marriages were considered the best. Gandharva marriage had limited social acceptance, but marriages like Asura, Rakshasa, and Paishacha were looked down upon or seen as inappropriate. Now, let's talk about the religious texts from the post-Vedic period. We know that the Rig Veda was composed in the pre-Vedic period, before the rest. The other three Vedas were written during the post-Vedic period. After Rig Veda came the Samaveda, which is considered the oldest source of music. The priest who chanted its mantras was called the Adgata. Music, the third Veda, was the Yajurveda. This Veda contains the rules and procedures for rituals and sacrifices. It's the only Veda written in both prose and poetry. The priest for this Veda was called the Advaryu. Yajurveda has two parts, the Krishna Yajurveda and the Shukla Yajurveda. The difference between them is that in the Krishna Yajurveda, the mantras and their explanations are mixed together, whereas in the Shukla Yajurveda, the mantras and explanations are written separately. Music, the last Veda, was the Atharvaveda. It contains magic. Tona, ghosts, spirits, medicines, and spells for controlling others are all included here. In this context, assemblies and committees are referred to as the two daughters of Prajapati. Their priest was called Brahma. Besides the Vedas, other religious texts were written during the later Vedic period. These were the Brahmanas. The Brahmanas were written to explain the complexities of the Vedas in simpler language. The largest Brahmana text was the Shatapatha Brahmana. This text describes the four main agricultural activities: plowing, sowing, harvesting, and stacking. After this, the important texts were the Upanishads, which are also known as Vedanta. They number 108. These are purely philosophical texts. Unlike other religious scriptures, the Upanishads seem to have a more modern outlook. They oppose ritualistic practices and emphasize the path of knowledge, focusing on the soul and the ultimate reality, Brahman. In the Chandogya and Brihadaranyaka Upanishads, there are conversations that highlight knowledge as the greatest power. Some stories suggest that, at times, truth, knowledge, and character were valued more than birth, even though in society, Sudras were considered the lowest caste. I had gone there, but in one place in the Upanishads, it is written that the soul is unborn, eternal, and pure. It is neither a Brahmin, nor a Kshatriya, nor a Vaisya, nor a Sudra. There are two other important religious texts in the Upanishads. One is the Mundaka Upanishad, and the other is the Katha Upanishad. India's national motto, Satyam Vijayate, truth alone triumphs, is taken from the Mundaka Upanishad. Now, let's talk about the Katha Upanishad. This Upanishad is famous for the dialogue between Acharya Yama and Nachikta about the soul and death. Now, let's discuss the gods of the post-Vedic period. The gods of the Rig Vedic period and those of the post-Vedic period. The gods were different too. The biggest gods of the Rigvedic period, Indra and Agni, lost their importance during this time. Instead, a new trio of gods came into existence. Music. This trio, called the Trimurti, consisted of three gods: Prajapati, whom we know as Brahma, Rudra, whom we know as Shiva, and Vishnu. Prajapati, or Brahma, was considered the creator of the universe. He was the supreme and most beloved god of the later Vedic period. The second in rank was Rudra, who was initially the god of animals but was later worshipped as Shiva. Here we go. Music. The third god was Vishnu. He was the protector of the Aryan tribes and a deity for the welfare of the people. There was another god named Pushan. In the Rig Vedic period, Pushan was the god of cattle. But in the later Vedic period, his status changed, and he was made the god of the Sudras. Now let's talk about the worship practices in the later Vedic period. While in the Rig Vedic period, religion was very simple and natural, with more emphasis on inner devotion and faith. In the later Vedic period, simple prayers were replaced by pure pronunciation of mantras and complex rituals. It was believed that gods didn't reward you because of your faith, but because of the offerings made in the yajna, sacrificial ritual, and the precise chanting of mantras. This took away the spiritual essence of Dharma, turning it into just a mechanical process. Under the influence of Brahmin texts like the Shatapatha Brahmana, kings and the upper class started performing these yajnas that lasted for months or even years, just to show off their status. These rituals often involved animal sacrifices. In the post-Vedic period, religion became associated with costly yajnas, animal sacrifices, and priestly dominance. It got stuck in Brahmanism. The priestly class declared themselves the only go-between, like messengers between God and humans. In return for performing rituals, priests were given huge amounts of gold, clothes, horses, and thousands of cows. The rituals became so complicated that an ordinary person couldn't perform them anymore. Now, let me tell you about the famous ashram system of the post-Vedic period. Assuming a human life to be 100 years, the ashram system was established during this time. The concept of ashrams was first mentioned in the Jabal Upanishad. Here's the translation into colloquial and authentic English. You get a step-by-step breakdown. There were 4 ashrams, which were like stages of life. The first one was the Brahmacharya ashram. A person followed this from birth until about 25 years old. This was the time for a child's education and learning. The second was the Grihastha ashram, which lasted from 25 to 50 years of age. The main purpose of this stage was to achieve dharma, artha, and kama. Dharma means doing good deeds like charity for the growth of righteousness. Artha means earning money, and kama means getting married and having children. This stage was considered the pillar of all the ashrams because all the others. Ashrams depended on the householder stage to meet their needs. The third stage was the Vanaprastha ashram, which lasted from age 50 to 75. In this stage, people developed a spiritual inclination and started preparing to give up their household life. The fourth stage was the Sannyasa ashram, lasting from 75 to 100 years of age. This stage focused on completely renouncing the world and attaining liberation. The Sannyasa ashram was established at the very end of the late Vedic period. Before that, only the first 3 ashrams were practiced. Music. Now, let's look at the late Vedic period. What was social life like for people? Was there any discrimination or hierarchy in society? For example, as we saw, during the Rigvedic period, the caste system was based on one's work. But in the later Vedic period, the caste system became based on birth. That means whichever caste or class a person was born into, they couldn't change it, no matter how talented they were or how many skills they learned. The main reason behind this strict caste system was political. Music. As income from agriculture increased, the ruling class, meaning the Kshatriyas and priests. So basically, the Brahmin class tied this system to birth to keep control over economic wealth, making sure they stayed on top and kept their privileges. The Brahmins were the highest and most important caste. I'm a Brahmin from the post-Vedic period. In the caste system, my position is the highest. My job is to study, teach, and accept donations. Yes, Brahmins or priests held the top spot in society. According to the texts, they were the ones who didn't have to pay taxes. Avidya means one who cannot be killed. Next comes the Kshatriya class, that's the ruling class. I'm a Kshatriya. You can also call me a king. My job is to protect the people, fight wars, and deliver justice. Yes, because of land and kingdom expansion, the political power of the Kshatriya class had increased a lot. The Brahmins and Kshatriyas together became the ruling or exploiting classes of society, and both were completely exempt from taxes. Now, third comes the Vaisya class. I am a Vaisya. My work is to do farming, raising livestock, and doing business. I'm the one who pays all the taxes for the entire empire. Yes, in the later Vedic texts, the Vaisya is described as Anasya Balkrit, meaning the one who pays taxes to others, and Anasya Adya, meaning the one who is exploited or taken advantage of by others. This was because the responsibility of paying taxes for the whole empire rested solely on the Vaisya caste. Keep in mind, Brahmins, Kshatriyas, and Vaisyas were all twice-born. Twice-born means they underwent the Upanayan ceremony. This Upanayan ceremony was considered a second birth. People from these three Varnas had the right to get an education. Now let's talk about the fourth Varna. The Varna that was at the lowest rung in the caste system was the Sudra Varna. I'm a Sudra. I'm seen as the lowest. My job is to serve the other three Varnas above me. I don't have the right to get an education. During the post-Vedic period, I was exploited the most. Yes, I was the only Varna considered Advija, not twice-born. People from the Sudra Varna were not allowed to have the Upanayan ceremony, which means they couldn't wear the sacred thread. This Varna. People weren't even allowed to learn from the Vedas. According to Aitreya Brahman, Sudras were considered servants to the three higher Varnas and could be punished or even killed at will. In the later Vedic period, the justice system was also based on caste. For the same crime, higher castes got lighter punishments while lower castes faced harsher physical penalties. Still, during this later Vedic period, extreme untouchability against Sudras wasn't common. Though socially seen as lower, Sudras could be seen without much issue. Touching him or his body wasn't considered a sin. Among the Sudras, there was a group called Rathkar. These were the craftsmen who made chariots. These people were respected in society because, back then, chariots were the main means for war, travel, and royal prestige. So chariot makers were seen as very useful. The strong hatred and untouchability towards Sudras started in the later part of the post-Vedic period, which is also called the Dharmashastra or Smriti period. During this time, texts like Manusmriti were written. We'll talk more about that in the next video. As time went on, things got worse for the Sudras, with more and more oppression. Over time, the caste system became harsher. Brahmins held excessive power. Vaisyas were economically exploited, and Sudras faced social discrimination. This growing dissatisfaction in society eventually led to major religious revolutions like Buddhism and Jainism around the 6th century BCE, 600 BCE, which directly challenged the birth-based caste system. Now, let's look at the status of women during the later Vedic period. Compared to the Rig Vedic period, in the later Vedic period, the situation had worsened a lot for them. Many of their rights were taken away. The girls were completely banned from performing the Upanayan ceremony. Once the Upanayan ritual was stopped, they were automatically denied the right to education. Now, they were left with only two things to do. One was housework, and the other was having children. During the Rigvedic period, women used to participate in the debates of tribal institutions like Sabha, Samiti, and Vedatha, and were part of the decision-making process. But even in the later Vedic period, we find examples of this in the Aitreya Brahmana. The Namaka text and the Maitrayani Samhita, which is a branch of the Yajurveda, mention this. I belong to the post-Vedic era. We are completely against giving any kind of rights to women. It's clearly written in the Brahmanas that daughters are the cause of all kinds of troubles, while sons are the protectors of the family. Let me give you another example. The Maitrayani Samhita, again a branch of the Yajurveda, says that there are 3 reasons for a man's downfall. The first is gambling, the second is drinking alcohol, and the third reason is woman. Yes, alongside these 2 evils, the woman was declared a third major evil. This shows that in the post-Vedic period, women were increasingly seen not as independent individuals, but merely as objects of consumption or obstacles in a man's path. Despite this decline, there were some exceptions that suggest a few women were highly educated even during this time. These women include Gargi, Maitri, and Katyayani, who made significant contributions to philosophy. Maitri and Katyayani were both renowned disciples of the sage Yajnavalkya. He had 2 wives. Among them, Maitri was extremely wise. When Yajnavalkya decided to divide his property between his 2 wives before becoming a renunciant, Maitri refused to accept any wealth and said, "What use is wealth to me if it doesn't grant me immortality, that is, liberation or knowledge?" Instead of asking for money, she asked the sage to teach her about self-knowledge. Gargi was a great philosopher and speaker in King Janaka's court. The dialogue between Gargi and Yajnavalkya is one of the most famous philosophical debates in history. This dialogue is recorded in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Let me tell you about Gargi, a great philosopher from ancient times. Once, King Janak organized a debate and announced that whoever turned out to be the greatest scholar would receive 1,000 cows, each with golden horns. Sage Yajnavalkya also came to this debate. He saw that no one there could match his knowledge. So, without even participating in the debate, he declared himself the greatest scholar. When he tried to claim the cows as the winner, the wise Gargi challenged him and said, "Rishavar, you can only take this cow with you if you defeat me in a debate." The debate began. A question-and-answer session started between Yajnavalkya and Gargi. Yajnavalkya asked, "If everything exists in Brahman, then where does Brahman itself reside?" Gargi replied, "Brahman resides within itself." Gargi posed extremely difficult philosophical questions to Yajnavalkya about the origin of creation, the self, and the universe. At one point, Yajnavalkya started running out of answers to Gargi's questions, and frustrated, he said, "Gargi, don't ask any more questions beyond this. Otherwise, they threaten to chop off your head from your body. Music, the path to knowledge, lights up through questions." After that, Gargi went silent and the debate ended. Yajnavalkya was declared the winner. A victorious smile spread across Yajnavalkya's face. He left with 100 cows. But the important thing is, even after more than 2,600 years, this event isn't remembered for Yajnavalkya's win, but for Gargi's courage and sharp wit. The outcome of this debate was that Gargi became known as one of the greatest figures in early history. She gained recognition as a philosopher and academic figure. In a male-dominated society, only Gargi could challenge a great scholar like Yajnavalkya to the brink of defeat. Today's historians see the threat Yajnavalkya gave Gargi as evidence of how women's voices were being suppressed in the later Vedic period. This incident proved that during the later